Foreigner Week has been probably one of the toughest weeks we've had here at Big Rig Nation. I've been hard on everyone inside this office. This week, we went through 5 viral threads from some of the largest creators in this industry. We went through thousands of comments. There was a lot of emotion, a lot of certainty, not always a lot of freight mechanics. So instead of arguing in comment sections, I wanted to do something really simple. So what we done was we pulled the 5 most repeated arguments about foreign drivers in trucking. We took it from 10 to just 5 because if we can't get the fundamentals right, 10 or 15 or 20 isn't going to matter. So at the end, we're going to address one extra point that keeps coming up, the one that ties this whole conversation together. Now, before we go anywhere, I want to get something straight. When we turn freight economics into identity battles, what we're doing is dividing drivers. And when drivers are divided, brokers and large institutions keep operating exactly the same way because division is expensive and it's expensive for drivers. Now, I want you to try to, when you watch this, think about this logically. If we're going to say freight rates collapse because of one group of people, then we also have to explain why rates are improving right now, because they are. Capacity is exiting, load to truck ratios are tightening, spot rates are stabilizing in many lanes. So if one group caused the crash, are they also causing the rebound? Or are we watching a normal freight cycle, an expansion, an oversupply, compression, correction? If we misdiagnose this cause, we will never be able to fix the problem. Being a veteran, I took an oath to protect this country and the people in it, domestic and foreign. Many of you don't understand what that means, but I live by those words in this very office with everyone that works here. Protecting drivers does not mean attacking other drivers who are legally doing the same job. Now, let's deal in structure. 5 core arguments, one extra point, freight mechanics only. Let's go. They haul freight cheaper than Americans. Let's assume for a second the labor data is roughly correct, that foreign-born drivers make up around 18 to 20% of heavy truck drivers nationally. That means 80% of the industry is still native-born. So if rates collapsed nationwide, and if cheap freight was being hauled everywhere, then it wasn't just one group hauling cheap. It was trucks, all trucks. Because here's how the market actually works. The rate gets set by the cheapest truck willing to move that load in a lane at that moment. Not by nationality, by willingness. If a 9 billion segment of the trucking economy collapsed, that doesn't happen because 20% of drivers exist. It happens because enough trucks, regardless of who is driving them, accepted those rates. If one group alone were setting the market, they would need majority control of available trucks in all the major lanes to dictate pricing. And the data doesn't show majority control anywhere. Now, I already know what a lot of people are going to say, that the data is corrupt. All right. So let's take the argument even further. Let's say it's not 20%. Let's say it's 40% foreigners, 60% domestic. You know what? Let's just do 50-50. Here's what still doesn't change. Freight doesn't move because of identity. Freight moves because trucks take freight. The market clears at the lowest truck that says yes. So if cheap freight moved for 2 straight years, that means enough trucks across the whole market said yes to cheap freight. That includes domestic trucks. That includes immigrant trucks. That includes everyone trying to survive a soft market. You see, that's oversupply behavior, not an accent problem. Let that sink in for just a minute. Think about it. Number 2, the foreigners flooded the market. Authority surged during the rate boom, but we have to go back and think why. Back then, I was doing, oversized and heavy haul. We were running loads for, $7, $8, $10 per mile rates. There was so much money floating around that the government was giving out. They were doing EILD money, PPP money. Cheap financing was insane. Company drivers were going owner operator, and Americans were leaving other industries. As a matter of fact, I can remember the drivers coming out of the oil field to jump into this gold rush. I had never seen money in all my life, pour into the trucking industry like I had then. Everyone was chasing peak money, and I mean everybody. When the rate spiked, capital enters. When demand normalizes, weaker capacity exits. This is simply a freight cycle, not a nationality cycle. Number 3, they cause all the crashes. Let's slow this down and talk scale a little bit, okay? Because there's a million of CDL holders in the United States. Non-domiciled CDL holders represent a small fraction of that total. It's widely reported as well under 1% nationally. So large truck fatal crashes numbers in the thousands every year. There is no federal crash data set showing that this small share of CDL's holders is dominating fatal large truck crashes nationwide. Are there accidents involving foreign drivers? Yes. Are there accidents involving domestic drivers? Yes. Trucking accidents are not nationality exclusive. And here's something very uncomfortable for us here at Big Rig Nation. When a crash involves a foreign driver, it becomes a headline. When a crash involves a domestic driver, it often just another tragic statistic. Right now, I'm involved in a case where domestic drivers ran over a school bus and killed 2 young girls, 2 children. That case did not dominate national headlines the way demographic stories often do. That doesn't minimize any tragedy. Every fatal crash is devastating. But if we're going to talk about safety honestly, we have to look at the entire data set, not just the stories that get amplified. Safety in trucking is about training, enforcement, compliance, accountability, not accents. If someone has national crash data showing demographic takeover, then show it, because scale matters. And narratives is not the same thing as data. Number 4, they get special tax breaks that Americans don't get. There is no federal tax provision that gives foreign truck drivers a special tax break that U.S. citizens do not have access to. Okay? Tax code in the United States applies based on residency status and income, not nationality. Okay? If someone is legally working here and filing taxes, they are taxed under the same federal structure as everyone else in that classification. Now, can businesses use deductions? Yes. Can owner-operators deduct certain expenses? Yes. Can corporations structure tax strategies? Absolutely, and they do every day. But that applies to citizens and non-citizens alike. There is no documented federal trucking program that says foreign drivers pay less taxes than Americans. If that existed, it would be easy to point to the statute. And the reason why is because tax code is public. Extraordinary claims require documentation. If someone has proof of a structured tax advantage exclusive to foreign drivers, this one I really need to see. Because accusations without documentation aren't mechanics, they're headlines. Okay, number 5. The government brought them in here to suppress wages. Now, this is a serious claim. This is one that I made everybody in this office work on. Because, thinking like that is kind of dangerous. So, for wages to be suppressed intentionally at a national level, you would need very coordinated control. Now, let's think through what that would actually require. To suppress trucking wages across the entire country, you would need a large share of total truck capacity, concentration in high volume freight lanes, consistent underbidding across the marginal spot market. You'd have to have broker alignment, contract freight displacement, and enough scale to influence national clearing prices. That's how wage suppression works in real markets. It requires dominance. Now, compare that to what we actually know about the trucking industry. A massive portion of freight moves under contract, okay? Large carriers and mega fleets control significant contract volume. Brokerages control access to spot freight, load boards aggregate overflow freight. Pricing power in trucking sits primarily with, large contract carriers, major brokerages, shippers controlling bid cycles. not with a demographic group of drivers. So, if wage suppression were coordinated at scale, this is what we would see. We would see market share concentration, lane dominance data, contract displacement trends, and documented pricing coordination. There is no data set showing any of this, and I've had my whole office go over this. What we did see during COVID was simple. We saw rates spiked, capacity rushed in, all these new MCs and authorities surged. Americans bought trucks, immigrants bought trucks. Company drivers went independent. Everyone responded to incentives. When demand normalized but trucks stayed, the rates compressed. That's textbook oversupply. Freight wages move when total capacity exceeds freight demand. That has happened in trucking long before this debate ever existed. You can criticize policy, you can criticize enforcement gaps, but wage compression in freight follows supply and demand mechanics, not identity mechanics. I want to talk about I believe what I see. And this is what I'm hearing for a lot of drivers. I started in the late 90s into trucking, and after the early 2000s is when I started seeing a lot of foreigners coming into our industry. Okay? And I want to deal with this one head on myself. A lot of drivers say, I don't need your data. I walk into a truck stop and I see it. I can stand beside the coffee machine and I believe what I see. And here's the honest answer to this. What you are seeing is very real. And what I seen all those years in the trucking industry was very real. But what you are seeing is not the entire market. Now, I know a lot of you don't want to hear this, but truck stops are not a national freight model. What they are is a snapshot. If what you see at one truck stop determined national freight pricing, then a rural truck stop in the middle of Wyoming could dictate rates from Los Angeles to New York. And that's not how freight works. The busiest fuel island in a rural county does not control a $900 billion industry. Freight rates are set across thousands of lanes, millions of loads, contract negotiations, spot boards, rail competition, seasonal demand, capacity entering and exiting the market. The market is bigger than a parking lot, way bigger. And here's the part that nobody really wants to admit. But during the downturn, there was as many domestic drivers, if not more, that hauled cheap freight too. Because when freight softens and capacity is high, the pressure explodes. The truck payments don't stop, the insurance doesn't stop, the fuel doesn't stop. When enough trucks, regardless of who's driving them, say yes to a cheap load, you see that's what sets the rate. That's oversupply behavior. It's not an accent problem. So if we're going to be honest about the industry, then we really need to be honest. Because too many of you out here are running cheap freight. I know that many of you are hurt out here because you've lost a lot these last few years. But trying to point the finger at one subject and blame the whole problem on one is not fixing anything. Big Rig Nation is not defending foreigners. We're defending evidence. And let me say this clearly. One of you made a comment that was like this. What Big Rig Nation is trying to do is be politically correct. They're not wanting to deal with the reality of it. If that was the case, I wouldn't be making this video at all. Because this doesn't help Big Rig Nation's image, because a lot of you it hurts. And we're not trying to do that. If you look at another driver and decide he's the problem because of an accent, you're not fixing the market, you're fragmenting it. You see, the brokers aren't divided, the mega carriers are not divided, the insurance companies aren't divided. Drivers are. And division is very expensive. It weakens bargaining power, it kills collective leverage, it distracts from structural reform, It turns drivers against each other while the system stays intact. Oversupply is very expensive. Fraud is expensive. Weak enforcement is very expensive. But division is the most expensive thing in the trucking industry. Because once drivers stop seeing each other as peers, they lose the only leverage they ever had. And they know this.